Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Saturdays in Stores podcast, which you can find as always right here on the Crossover Media Network. My name is Kanaye, and a lot of exciting news coming out this past week, or maybe I should say 2 weeks, in the world of UConn Huskies basketball. Dan Hurley has done an amazing job in really putting together one of the tougher non-conference schedules in the country going into next college basketball season, which I'm super pumped about, and I'm going to be talking a lot about in this episode today. A little bit of NBA rumors relating back to Hurley, him potentially taking the Knicks job. I think that's kind of quieted at this point. He's even come out and said, put out a statement about it. But I'm going to touch on that too, just really briefly coming up. But before we get into that, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, please engage with our content any way you can, whether it's liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or just telling other people about it. It really does help with being able to grow what we do here at the Crossover. So let's get right into it. I think a fair place to start probably is the Dan Hurley to the NBA rumors that kind of were sparked after the Knicks fired Coach Tom Thibodeau. Of course, it's definitely a move that by the Knicks that is pretty polarizing across the NBA world. A lot of people have came out and said that they don't think he should have been fired. Others have said that he probably just isn't the guy. And I kind of look at it as it wasn't necessarily deserved, but it needed to happen for the Knicks to kind of get to that next step. But again, I'm not really an NBA guy on this channel. I'm more so college basketball, as you guys already know if you've been keeping up with our videos for as long as I've come on here at the Crossover. But yeah, of course, like last summer, Dan Hurley was named to be a candidate that the Lakers want to go after strongly. Of course, turned that down. Pretty big number he turned down to chase a three-peat coming back to UConn. He has been named as a guy who the Knicks could potentially look to go after. Other guys like Jay Wright, which I doubt is probably going to happen. And then other NBA coaches like Mike Malone, and I forget who else off the top of my head, could end up being that next Knicks head coach. But Dan Hurley, I'm sure, was probably a guy that the Knicks wanted to maybe go after. Hurley actually came out and said that he's not doing that again this summer. He doesn't want to go through another summer of there being speculation whether he was going to jump a level to the NBA or not. And I honestly think that he very much feels that he has a lot of unfinished business left in STORRS, Connecticut, which I definitely agree with. I think he wants to really put himself into the upper echelon on the all-time college coach rankings. I mean, he's already 2 national championships. He wants to chase third. That would tie him with Calhoun for the most by UConn head coach. And considering if they are able to make it back to a Final Four and be a national championship contender the way we think they're going to be going to next year, then to be able to win potentially 3 championships in 4 years would definitely have him jump a few names, I believe, in the all-time college basketball coach rankings. But yeah, I think Dan Hurley is very motivated going into the season to stick it out in STORRS. And I just never really felt that the Knicks thing. I do think if he's ever to go to the NBA, that would probably be the one team that he would choose to leave his job security at UConn for, that being the Knicks. But I just think at this point, with the roster he's built and clearly what he's done with the job scheduling, which I'm literally going to touch on in just a few seconds, I think he's very much all in on this UConn program, and he wants to continue to build on the dominance that's been what this program has been the last few years. And I'm super excited that he's not seriously considering the Knicks in this situation. Not that I don't think he would make a good NBA coach. I definitely think X's and O's wise he's there. I would be curious to see how his personality meshes with guys who are NBA players, just considering that the pay grade, it's different than what it works, how it works in college, with coaches making more than the players. Of course, players are getting paid now, so it is starting to sort of even out in college. But in the NBA, the players make way more than the coaches. So it's interesting to see the relationships Hurley would have with NBA players if he were to ever coach an NBA roster. But again, as far as I know, I'm pretty adamant that he is going to be staying in STORRS, Connecticut. Again, he came out and said that he doesn't want to do that again this offseason with the NBA coaching rumors. I would say it's a pretty safe bet to say that he's going to be UConn's head coach going to next year. So now, speaking of next year, and like I just mentioned briefly a few minutes ago, Dan Hurley has built really an absolute gauntlet of a non-conference schedule for the UConn Huskies men's basketball team. John Rothenstein came out and said that this probably is the toughest non-conference schedule in the history of UConn men's basketball, and I have a tough time disagreeing with him. I know there was a year, I want to say it was 2010, when UConn played both the likes of Kentucky and Duke, when both those programs were in the top 5 in the AP poll or Ken Palm. I forget off the top of my head which of the two. They might have been both. But again, outside of that, this, I think Rothenstein has a point here that this schedule looks really, really good. I mean, just to name the games right now, on November 15th, UConn is going up to STORRS North, aka TD Garden, to play BYU. That's a game I'm really, really excited for. I believe that is the first Power 5 non-conference game in UConn's non-conference schedule. So I'm really excited to see that. Like most of the other people who cover the sport, we're all thinking that BYU was probably a preseason top 10 team. I've seen people have them as high as top 5. I had a really tough time taking them out of my top 5 in my updated rankings. That me and Josh did. But yeah, they fell a little bit for me just considering what some other programs got back. But still, they're good enough to be a top 5 program. They're returning Richie Saunders, who was their leading scorer from this past year, one of the most underrated players in the country. They got the number 1 freshman in the class, depending on who you ask, in AJ DeBanta. You got Robert Wright in the portal, who really was great against UConn when Baylor came up to Gamble Pavilion this past season. On top of that, you bring back Kebe Akita and you land Kennard Davis Jr., who I think is going to be one of the best glue guys in college basketball next season. You have Xavier Stanton coming off the bench as well as some other shooters for BYU. So I think that game is a really, really good challenge to see where this roster is right off the bat, honestly. And this really is BYU's best chance to really put themselves in the national spotlight. Just considering that BYU's non-conference schedule really isn't all that strong. UConn is by far the toughest opponent that they're probably going to have to play. But yeah, so I'm super excited for that game. Of course, it's nice that's right there in Boston, so the Husky fans can make an easy commute if they want. The next game on this non-conference schedule is November 19th against Arizona. For the home games, the true home games on the schedule, it hasn't been announced whether that's going to be at Gamble Pavilion or actually, it's not the XL Center anymore. I forget the name off the top of my head, but I believe some insurance or health care group bought the naming rights to the XL Center. So it's no longer the XL Center. Probably still going to call it the XL Center. So definitely bear with me on that. But yeah, it's going to be either at Gamble or XL. It just hasn't been named yet. Announced, I should say, or what venue is going to be hosting these true home games. But I'm sure that'll come out probably later on, more than likely in the early to mid stretches of September. I would assume that's normally when UConn puts out their full schedule with venues and all that. But yeah, Arizona, I'm super excited for. They lost a lot, of course, Caleb Love, KJ Lewis, and Carter Bryant as well. Henry Vasar is now at North Carolina. But, they reloaded. They got a few guys back. Jalen Bradley should definitely make a leap for Arizona. They got Koa Piat and a really talented freshman class. Bryce James is there. I don't think he starts for Arizona, but who knows? He could be a contributor off the bench. So I'm sure that's going to bring a lot of extra hype to the game, especially for UConn fans if it is in Gamble. I mean, I'm sure it should be a hyped up game regardless, but especially in Gamble, if Bryce James is there, I'm sure it's going to be a really electric atmosphere. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a good schedule, a good add to the schedule, I should say, by Dan Hurley. I think Arizona has a really high upside. Of course, they do have a chance to kind of fizzle out and maybe not have the greatest season, but I definitely think throughout the course of the season, they're probably going to be ranked in the realm of anywhere from top 15 to top 25. I have a tough time seeing them falling out of the poll at any point in the year. The next game on this non-conference schedule is November 25th, which is Black Friday, against Illinois at Madison Square Garden, aka STORRS South. I really, really do like this pick for a game to have, especially Black Friday. I think I don't believe there's any other games, at least primetime games, scheduled for Black Friday right now. Of course, that could change, but I think this could be a really, really good, or at least hyped up game going in, just considering it is the only primetime game slotted for Black Friday right now in college basketball. Illinois is another team that has a lot of upside, but also a lot of questions to answer. Of course, me and Josh, if you've watched our Crossover U podcast, know we've talked about the Balkan Five and how Brad Underwood's gone fully towards the international players and recruiting them. And I'm really excited to see how that team plays. I definitely have Illinois as a sleeper team this year. I think they're more than capable of being able to get to a Final Four with their offensive firepower, which we think they're going to bring in, just considering how skilled international guys are, Europeans are on the offensive side of the ball. Pretty much is going to be a matter of defense for them. They're bringing back Kai and Ba as well. Other guys got to make leaps, like Big Z, Big Vlad he's going to have to take a jump too. And I am curious to see how Petrovic could end up playing the point. I think he's probably going to end up playing the point for Illinois. So I'm really curious to see how he handles that, because I think that kid has a chance to be really good. Of course, they got Andrei Stojakovic, who definitely I think should have gone to a high major level sooner than what he did, but now he gets the chance to prove that he can hoop at that level. on national spotlight. So I'm really excited for this game at MSG. I think it's going to be a good test for UConn, just considering I think this is going to be a really solid, or I mean, it could end up being a top 10 Ken Palm offense, that being Illinois. And I think it's going to be a great test defensively for this roster, that being UConn. Again, have said in the past, I really love the ads and what UConn has done in this offseason. I think the defense should be a lot better. I've seen Solo Ball come out and say that a main point of his improvement that he wants to focus on, nail in on in this offseason, in his personal development as a player, is becoming a complete guard, just an all-around player, one who can defend at a really high level, do more than just be a three-point shooter, facilitate, attack closeouts, do some more stuff off the dribble. So I'm really excited to see that. And again, I think this UConn team is going to be a lot better defensively than what we saw this past year. So I think Illinois is going to be a really great challenge. The next game on the schedule is December 2nd at Fog Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas. I know a lot of UConn fans, when this game was announced, were pretty upset, just considering that this is the second time in a row that UConn is playing Kansas at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. The reason this is because 2 years ago, in 2023, in December, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was early December when it happened, like December 3rd of that season, I believe. Of course, UConn went up to Fog Allen Fieldhouse, barely lost what was a really good game. Tristan Newton had 31 points. Stephon Castle didn't play, and Cam was playing with a bum ankle. But it was still a really good game. Of course, it's tough to win in Fog Allen Fieldhouse. Definitely by far the toughest place to win in college basketball, I still think. But again, that was the Big East Big 12 battle. It wasn't necessarily a home and home. I know there's been some people have come out and said Kansas has kind of been ducking UConn for a while, at least ducking going to Connecticut to play UConn. And I'm sure, at some point it would be great to have that. But that's what we're going to get next year, because now UConn and Kansas has agreed to a home and home series. So this year, UConn will be going up to Lawrence, Kansas to play at Fog Allen. The following year, they will be coming up to either STORRS or Hartford to play UConn. So that'll be something to look forward to next season, or not this upcoming season, the one after. But again, this upcoming season, we're going up to Fog Allen. I think this will be a really good test. I don't think this is your mother's Kansas in terms of just this. Bill Self has kind of done a little bit of an underwhelming job in reconstructing his roster this offseason. Of course, they really fell below expectations this past year, how just considering they got every big name transfer for the most part and really just weren't good. There's no team chemistry, a lot of egos on that past year's team. But now they have, again, depending on who you ask, the number one, number two incoming freshman in Darren Peterson. I'm really excited to see how he plays. But outside of that, Kansas really doesn't have all too much. I really do think this game is more so of a test to see how this UConn roster is going to be able to handle playing on the road in a tough crowd environment. I think it's something that's going to challenge them more so mentally than X's and O's wise, nor on the actual court. Just being able to see, and just for Hurley and the coaching staff, just being able to see how this roster is still able to execute the plays, the sets, and whatever actions they run in a house that's going to be really, really loud. Of course, we all know how crazy it gets in Fog Allen Fieldhouse. So I definitely think that's a game that they could potentially lose, but at the same time, if they're able to come out with a win, then I think that's something that you're really, really happy with and proud of. Now, the next game on the schedule is one that I'm really, really excited about. It's right next to BYU, maybe even a little bit above in terms of the games on this non-conference schedule, which I'm most excited for. But that's December 9th in the Jimmy V Classic at Madison Square Garden against Florida, the team who knocked UConn out this past season in the NCAA tournament in the second round. UConn arguably gave Florida the best run for their money in the tournament. Of course, Florida went on to win the national championship. So we're getting a rematch, not only from this past year's NCAA tournament, but also a game between the last two programs who won a national championship, which UConn obviously going back to back, and Florida now winning this past year. So I'm really excited to see Florida's completely reloaded. I really love the job Todd Golden's done. He's the analytics darling of college basketball right now. Just how much him and his staff focus not only on basketball mindsets of being driven by what basketball heads and minds kind of just the way they think, but on top of that, the analytics part, the stats, the math that goes into all of it. It's really interesting to see how they run the program, how they construct their rosters, and then, of course, how they execute on the game floor. Again, I really love the job Todd Golden's done reloading that Florida roster. They brought in Boogie Flan, Xavier Lee, really talented backcourt there. You got back Thomas Houck, as well as Alex Condon and Ruben Chinilu to fill out your front court. And they got good shooting off the bench with Clavzar. But yeah, I think this is a game that it's going to be really tough for UConn to win. I think it should be close, and I'm really excited to see. the rematch of these two programs from last year's NCAA tournament exit for the Huskies. But again, I think this is a game that a lot of the guys are going to go We're going to be super motivated going into. Alex Caravan, Terrace Reed, Solo Ball, Jalen Stewart. I'm sure that loss is still very, very fresh in the minds of those guys, and all those guys now in presumed starting roles. I would say for Terrace and Stewie, I think they're going to want to show up and have a big game. And hey, Madison Stew Garden. Jalen Stewart tends to play really, really good at the Garden. Remember the Big East Championship game 2 years back when he made the 3 threes against Marquette? Last year against Gonzaga, every time Gonzaga was coming back, Jalen Stewart would kind of shut that down and go on a run on his own to give UConn a little bit more breathing room. I'm really excited to see this game. It's going to be Madison Square Garden, the Jimmy V Classic. Jimmy V Classic almost never disappoints. So again, I'm super pumped for that game. And to round out this out of conference schedule, December 12th versus Texas. This is the return game of the home and home series, which UConn and Texas agreed to several years or 2-3 years back at this point. Of course, UConn went out to Austin this past year to play Texas. Now Texas is coming back in the return game. So again, it hasn't been announced whether it's going to be at Gamble Pavilion or at the XL Center in Hartford. So I'll be looking forward to seeing where that game's going to be. I wouldn't be shocked if they put this game in Hartford just because I think Texas will be better than they were this past season. Of course, Sean Miller's taking over there. He brought over Dalen Swain, got back Jordan Pope as well as Chendall Weaver. But I just don't think that they really stack up as a caliber of an opponent the way some of the other teams on this non-conference schedule do. And I'm going to knock on wood on that there. Of course, I'm not trying to jinx a UConn loss there. So I definitely think Texas will be better than last year. But if you're to rank these games, if you're to look at all these games, I'd probably say Texas is probably the weakest opponent they're going to play. Just considering it's at home, and I don't think Texas's roster is going to really stack up the way some of these other ones do. But just to look at this roster in a whole, you have BYU on there, you have Florida, you have Arizona, Illinois, and Kansas. I would probably say top 25. So there alone, you have 5 top 25 games. BYU, I think most people would consider a top 10 team. I definitely do going into the preseason. Same thing goes for Florida. I believe Florida should be top 5 going into the year. I know a lot of people do after the return of both Thomas Howe and Alex Condon, along with the additions of Boogie Flynn and Xavier Lee. So Arizona could be on the cusp of being a top 10 team, but I think they open up the season probably in the 15 to 20 range. I'm not as high on Arizona as I am on BYU and Florida going into the year. But again, that's arguably 3 top 15 games that you're going to play in your out-of-conference schedule. I will say, I wish the one game they chose to kind of be that a true away out-of-conference game. I really would have liked to see Duke going to Cameron Indoor, just considering I think Duke's roster is a lot better than what Kansas's looks like going into the year. And I think if you're going to Fog Allen Fieldhouse, I feel like you'd rather play a Kansas team that's really looking like a national championship contender. And let's just be honest here, outside of Darren Peterson, Kansas doesn't have a lot going into the season. If you go to Duke at Cameron Indoor, that's a team that definitely has a chance to make it back to a Final Four. And Cameron Indoor is also a really, really crazy crowd environment too. So I just think that if you're, going in to make the sacrifice of having to play at Fog Allen, then you'd probably rather play a little bit of a better Kansas team than what they're probably going to be this upcoming year. But outside of that, I think a lot of credit has to go to Dan Hurley and his staff. And just being able to reach out to these schools and get these games scheduled. I love really being for the first really year in the Dan Hurley era, UConn, just seeing this program really challenge themselves in the out-of-conference period of the season. I think that goes to tell a lot about how Dan Hurley feels about his roster going into this year. Just considering the last few years, even in the years that they've won national championships, UConn's out-of-conference schedule honestly hasn't been all that strong. You think back to 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they played in the PK 84 Phil Knight Invitational. Of course, they played Alabama that year, who ended up going on to be the number 1 overall seed. They beat them, so that was actually a really good win. But outside of that, there weren't too many great wins. They did beat Florida that year on the road, which was a pretty solid win too. But outside of those 2 games, nothing too noteworthy, I would say, that season in the out-of-conference time of play. And then the following year, you go to Fog Allen Fieldhouse and you lose there. That Kansas team honestly didn't end up being all too good. You beat Gonzaga in Seattle, which, again, that Gonzaga team wasn't all that good. You beat UNC, who did end up being a 1 seed. I think that honestly carried UConn's resume that year for a long time, at least until they played Marquette in Big East play when Marquette was top 5 in the country. And outside of that, they played Texas and Indiana in the Empire Classic, which, again, those teams weren't really all that good. This past year, I definitely think Hurley I know he was kind of pushing that agenda of feeling that they were going to be able to go for the three-peat. But I think he kind of deep down knew that this roster maybe wasn't as strong head to toe as the ones from the past 2 seasons before that. And let's just be honest, it wasn't the best out of conference schedule to have. I mean, Maui go 0-3. Of course, you don't expect that to happen, but it hurts because you play lower tier opponents when you lose, and then when you lose to those teams like they did, then that really drags down your resume. Baylor wasn't all that good this season. I think they definitely fell below the expectations that a lot of people, including myself, had for that program going into the season. They beat Gonzaga, who looked really, really good at the time, but of course, it kind of fizzled out towards the end of the year. I mean, just really towards the end of their out of conference schedule is when they really start to kind of go on the downfall. But yeah, I definitely really, really do like the schedule as opposed to the last few years. Hurley's come out and said he's not doing MTE anymore, which I get after Maui. But I think it's good to have these neutral site games and have some of these games at home. Again, I really think this is very telling that Hurley feels very strongly about this roster's chances to compete for a national championship next year. I also feel that way. I think feel a lot better going to this season than I did going to last season in terms of roster construction. Alex Demery Jr. was a huge pickup. It brings a lot of size at the point guard spot. You get Solo Ball back, you get Terrace Reed back, Jalen Stewart. All guys are going to be in much bigger roles this year and have a chance to really break out. I know Solo kind of already has. Stewart is the one we're really waiting on to break out, which I think we're going to get this year. Alex Caravan no longer kind of has to be that one option. He can fall back and be a third or fourth, which I think is where he fits best. And I think the bench mob is going to be really good between the likes of Malachi Smith, Braylon Mullins, the two Jay Rosses. I think Jaden obviously is going to probably play more than Jacob. You got Eric Ryba, freshman 7-footer coming off the bench for Terrace Reed whenever he needs a breather, which I'm really excited to see. And yeah, I think the late ads like Dwayne Carome and Alec Melender are going to bring a lot of experience, and they're going to bring unique skill sets, which I think this coaching staff and team can definitely use in a lot of unique ways. So again, I'm really excited for the season. Just seeing this out of conference schedule gets me more and more pumped up for what is to come this upcoming season. But I think that's pretty much going to take care of everything I have for this episode today. Again, because we're not in season right now, it's not going to be every Saturday. Any big news like this out of conference schedule pretty much being finalized comes out, I'll make a video. But until then, it's of course not going to be every Saturday. But again, until the next episode, I will see you all next time.